To the Interlocutor podcast. I'm Tyrel Cameron Eskelson. My guest today is Professor Randall B. Woods. Randall grew up in Texas and graduated from the University of Austin, Texas. In the early 1970s, he moved to the University of Arkansas, where he's been teaching and writing for more than 50 years. Today, he joins me for a discussion about his latest book entitled John Quincy Adams, A Man for the Whole People. Dr. Woods, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Tyrel.
So you were born in 1944 in Texas. Whereabouts were you born and raised?
I was born in Galveston on the coast, old seaport city, but my father was killed when I was 2, and so we moved to Taylor, Texas, which is a suburb of Austin. And so I grew up just outside of Austin.
I see. And so when you went to university, you chose the city in which you were living?
Well, it's about 20 miles away. It was
20
about
miles away.
I wanted to go to Texas because at that point I intended to go to medical school. And if you wanted to go to medical school, that's where you need to go. As it turned out, when I found out what physicians do, I decided that it wasn't for me. And so, much to my future wife's dismay, I chose academia, which reduced our income by a factor of at least 10. I think it was the right choice.
I read on one of your profiles that you served in the armed forces. Was that right after high school that you did that?
No, I was 24 years old. I just finished my master's degree in 1969. The Vietnam War was at its height, so I was drafted then. And I served a year and a half on active duty and then in the reserves, but I never saw combat. I was in the communications encryption.
Yeah. And after your service, or at least active service, ended, you returned to the University of Austin and continued with your doctorate in, was it a focus on American diplomatic history?
Yes. I wrote my dissertation on U.S.-Argentine relations during the Second World War, which were fraught because of the large Italian and German presence in Argentina and their reluctance to become part of the Allied war effort. That was when during the rise of one Paul. So yeah, that was my dissertation.
And what was it like moving to Arkansas and beginning your academic career there, where you've stayed for your entire career?
I have, and I spent a year at Williams as a distinguished professor and at Oxford as a John Quincy professor. But I have stayed here. I was lucky to get a job. The job market was terrible when I came out, and so I was fortunate. Many of my colleagues did not get jobs, and I got a job at a research institution. We've had chances to move, but my family has been here most of the time. My children and grandchildren. And universities enable me. I don't, I respect institutions, but it's not where you went to school or really where you are. It's what you do. I think I concentrated more on that and university's been quite good to me and it's enabled me to be, I think.
When did you first become interested in reading history? Was it something you did as a child or something that developed later in life?
It developed later in life. My brother and sister were older than I was, were quite precocious. Some of them were English majors, and in college they were part of kind of intellectual set in high school. So I grew up in a household where there was a lot of discussion of current events, a New Yorker and a magazine. So my family was on both sides is not wealthy, but in terms of money, but I was fourth generation, and my siblings were fourth generation college graduates on both sides. That was this kind of tradition of respect for education and artistic and literary achievement. My sister has 4 children, one a physician, the other 3 are professional musicians. So it was a kind of a creative environment.
Was it also an expectation that you would go to college? No.
I mean, that I was an expectation I'd go to college. Absolutely, I mean, there's no question about that. Yeah, professional of some sort. Yeah, absolutely.
I was reading through your bio of published works, and I saw that you published a book called Shadow Warriors in 2013, and your next book is John Quincy Adams in 2024. So I'm wondering if somewhere in this range of, say, 2012 to 2014, you made a decision that you wanted to switch your writing focus from the 20th century and move to John
Yeah.
Quincy Adams. How did that idea develop?
Well, I didn't want to write the same book over and over. I spent nearly all of my, well, I think I did a biography of a black journalist, politician, diplomat who grew up on the Kansas frontier. I've always been interested in civil rights. Is my second book, but I'm primarily a diplomatic historian, political historian. And I spent nearly all my life in World War II and the origins of the Cold War. I thought it would be perhaps it would be good for me intellectually to immerse myself in a different period. Quincy Adams is regarded by many as America's greatest Secretary of State. As a diplomatic historian, he's always been sort of in the back of my mind. He's also has turned out a fascinating individual and personal life. So, but I thought perhaps going back to a different era would refresh me, and perhaps I could bring some new eyes. I spent 8 years. I approached a number of the major figures in writing and early American history, and sort of asked their permission. I didn't want them to think that I sort of anyone could jump into their field, and they were quite welcoming. Books are political diplomatic biographies. So, and that's what they were. So they were quite upset. But you have to be careful that to presume these people spent their lives studying. Okay.
One of the things I enjoyed in the book was how you took time in certain places to really flesh out the context of what was going to happen or how John Quincy was going to be involved in this, and sort of the different or divided thought that was going into some issue. I liked that part of the book because it really brought the context of that time there.
Yeah, the book is, and I write the history is quite legitimate, and research is very sound, and I think have the respect of my peers, but my audience are educated lay people, and I feel like historians have a duty to try, particularly if they're interested in politics and politics, try to affect or inform public discourse, and so that's really who I write for. So the book is 1/3 travel history, 1/3 family history, and the other third political diplomatic history. John Adams, Quincy's father, had a friend who told him, he said, "You're one of the few Americans who are privileged to have traveled abroad, and you owe it to your countrymen who don't have that opportunity to record everything you see." So Adams' family, John Quincy, Abigail, and Louisa, Quincy Adams has a 7,000-page diary, and between the four of them, there are 2,400 letters, and so there's this compelling image of rural Spain, Paris, Scandinavia, ocean travel, Silesia, and so I think. And I'm sort of a visual thinker, and I think that it makes for compelling reading for those things. Also, the family was very complex, very flawed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
I think
I loved that approach of the travelogue, the family history, and the diplomatic history, because all three topics were incredibly interesting.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like to ask you, the first chapter is called The Adamses of Braintree. How far back does that family go in that Massachusetts area?
To the late 1600s. Adams, I think John Quincy was either third or fourth generation.
Mm-hmm.
They were typical English immigrants, Protestants seeking economic opportunity and religious freedom. So it's one of the families that are named Adams or Adamstown. Braintree was the original name of the original community in which they lived. It became Quincy, a suburb of Boston. But and I use Braintree because these people were farmers. I mean, they were educated. John Quincy were both lawyers. Their forebears, Abigail's father was a clergyman from Harvard, so but they're also farmers. They have
Mm-hmm.
to eke out a living. And the contrast between them and people like Thomas Jefferson and particularly the Southern plantation owners became starkly apparent at the Continental Congresses. I mean, you're dealing with suddenly among very wealthy grandees. The thing they had in common was a common education.
Mm-hmm.
Fathers read the same books, were steeped in classical literature, modern European history. So while there was this vast disparity and wealth, there was, more importantly, intellectual commonality. The one that
Mm.
started referred to it as the Republic of Letters that was transatlantic.
Would it be fair to view John Adams's life as sort of rising up and through education and work as a lawyer, he advanced his career and his prospects through hard work? That he didn't really start from, I don't
Well,
know if humble beginnings is the right way to characterize it. How would you characterize his rise to the role he played in the Revolution and
well,
Declaration of Independence?
it's very interesting. These people were the founding fathers, Jefferson, and these people were colonials, and
Mm-hmm.
they, they were part of a movement and a phenomenon of the American Revolution, which happened quite suddenly within a 10-year period. No, and they thought of themselves as British. They had no collective awareness or sense of being American. They indeed one of the reasons for the revolution was that the colonials wanted to be treated as British citizens and were not being treated equally as British citizens. So they didn't have this, when they looked at their future, they didn't see participation in the creation of a republic kind of participating in a unique political system that would be under siege for 50 years and had to fight for its independence. That came sort of overnight. So they kind of playing it by ear. But John Adams and like John Quincy and Abigail had this sense of they were very well read and very involved in civic affairs and politics in Massachusetts, and so they, in a sense, they were then able to act out their ambitions, realize their ambitions on a much larger scale. But they had they didn't anticipate it. They could not anticipate the revolution and independence and what that would mean. So they were very much playing it by ear, going day by day, actually. And Quincy Adams had a much greater sense of personal destiny, which was
Mm-hmm.
instilled by his parents. Said when Quincy Adams, with his wife Louisa and his youngest son, they spent the period from 1809 to 15. Quincy Adams was America's first minister to Imperial Russia, and by 1811, the other ministers at court, the French and the Spanish, had these huge stipends, very extravagant style. And the Adams were, they were represented a republic and had very little money. It's very difficult for them. climate was hard. And then in 1811, Quincy wrote his father, John, saying, I think I'm going to diplomatic career up and come back and practice law, try to make some money. And his father wrote him back and said, my dear son, your mistress is your country, and you are destined to serve her, be abused by her, to suffer with her, but make no boast about it. You'll never be able to retire from public life. So, that turned out to be true. But so Quincy, much more than the older generation, had this sense of destiny and sort of concrete ambitions to advance in public life.
Would it be fair to say that for some or a lot of the time when they were in St. Petersburg, that they enjoyed their time there, despite many of the hardships?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was that's one of my favorite parts of the book because
Yeah, me too.
Quincy Adams was okay. Well, let's go back a little bit. He did not come unprepared. You remember he went with his father when he was 11 years old in 1778 to Paris, and with a short exception, he remained in Europe until he was 18. He was with his father in Paris when Jefferson was there, and when they were implementing the Franco-American Treaty of 1778. He went with his father when he was manager of the Netherlands. Quincy Adams went to St. Petersburg with Francis Dana, his father's secretary, to serve him as secretary when they were seeking approval from Catherine the Great. Quincy Adams had already had, by the time he was 18, he had the reputation of being the best traveled American alive. So by the time he went to St. Petersburg, he was very familiar with European culture, history. He was entranced by it. He already spoke fluent in French. And you ask if they enjoyed themselves. They felt at home culturally, intellectually. They struggled financially. But Quincy Adams became quite close personally to Alexander I, and that was very important to the United States during the run-up to the War of 1812 and to Napoleon's invasion of Russia. The U.S. and Russia were the only major neutrals. They were caught between the British Articles Council and Napoleon's continental system, which sought to help trade off with the two rival coalitions. And so the Russians and Americans traded with each other, strengthened with each other, supported each other. And in future years, during when Quincy Adams was Secretary of State, his friendship with Alexander I played a major role. Most people, the climate was so harsh there that other ministers from other countries would, after they returned home, would have to take a year off to rehabilitate themselves physically, since it was so harsh. But not Adams. Quincy Adams was, as you know from the book, was something of a fitness nut.
Swimming, right?
Well, in Russia, he made it a point to walk 4 to 6 miles before dawn from wherever he was. Rain, snow, sleet, whatever. And maybe that contributed, one of the things contributed to his longevity. But very unusual on that day and time to live, as long as he and his father did.
Maybe we could say something too about the hardships of his travels and time in St. Petersburg. I also enjoyed this part of the book, not that it's enjoyable to learn of other people's suffering, but to remind oneself that these were tough times. And for example, his wife had, I can't remember how many pregnancies with very little success. And while in St. Petersburg, they had a daughter who lived until around the age of 1 year old, and then she passed away, which was incredibly devastating for both of them, and for the reader, too.
Yeah, agonizing death. And they were, Louisa was pregnant continually from the time she got married until she was in her 40s. And they had 4 children. The rest were miscarriages, stillbirths. 4 died. And the sophistication of these people in terms of their education, their conversation, their political acumen, their knowledge of painting and music, it stares in stark contrast with the kind of the brutality of existence. I mean, it took the sea voyages. It took 26 days, storms, poor navigation. The level of medical care was had lagged far behind other absolute primitive. Little Louisa, the baby died. The doctors thought it was from TB. They would give the answer to any and all diseases was to give people very strong laxatives and bleed them, or leeches. So yeah, that is a particularly stark, and it's a particularly stark contrast. I mean, these people we're dealing with are not average Americans. If you see what I'm saying, I mean they're not at all typical. But the Adams, because they were New Englanders and farmers and not plantation owners, felt the primitiveness of existence particularly acutely. I know. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. And one of the most memorable things, John was a young, I think he was probably 13. His father visited Britain and then had to get back to the Netherlands. And the weather was so bad they couldn't land at the port. The ship left them offshore, about 200 miles from Amsterdam in the dead of winter. Just put them ashore. And you remember they had to they found a fisherman's hut and got to the nearest town, and then had to go by farm wagon, for the rest of the way. And they had to go across ice floes and be pulled in and out by the workers in it. And John, the illness was some sort of omnipresent. Yeah, it was a stark contrast between the sophistication in one sense and the crudity.
So John Quincy Adams was in St. Petersburg at the same time that Napoleon's army was attacking towards Moscow.
Right.
And then did he go to, was it in Belgium?
Yeah.
To the Treaty of Ghent?
Right.
I'm interested in what his role in the Treaty of Ghent was, and what the outcome of his role was, and then also his wife was still in St. Petersburg, and you told this amazing story of her 40-day journey to go from St. Petersburg to Paris by coach to meet with John Quincy Adams. I thought that was one of the most amazing parts of the book. I loved that story.
Thanks. Yeah. The Quincy Adams was still Minister to Russia when Napoleon invaded, and the diplomatic corps considered leaving leaving St. Petersburg. Napoleon overran Moscow, but they didn't. And of course, Alexander's armies and the Russian winter defeated Napoleon, laid the basis for eventually his first defeat and his second defeat. But meanwhile, the U.S. had declared war on Great Britain because of their seizure of ships that they believed were trading with the French, and also primarily because of the oppressment of American seamen into the British naval service. Quincy Adams believed that our cause was just, but that we were so weak compared to the British that it was almost all. The U.S. came very close to being defeated, but didn't. The British, more because of European conditions and the international situation with Napoleon's defeat, Russia's emergence as a dominant power, decided to get negotiations with U.S. representatives. Quincy Adams headed the U.S. delegation at Ghent. For 4 months, there was very complex, difficult negotiations with the British. But the American delegation was extremely skilled. At the U.S., there were a couple of major battles that were either won by the U.S. or a stalemate. But the upshot was that the British agreed to make peace, and the Treaty of Ghent merely restored the status quo ante bellum situation that had existed before the war began. But given the fact that the British were in physical occupation of large swaths of American territory, that the treaty was really a triumph for the U.S. And afterward, Quincy Adams would be named minister to Great Britain, and he and Lord Castlereagh, the foreign secretary, would begin to carve out a rapprochement, an Anglo-American rapprochement. There were bitter feelings on both sides, but both men recognized it was in each nation's interest to achieve some kind of accommodation. And we're dealing with a number of specific issues, territorial and economic. Adams was at the center of this rapprochement, one of its architects, which was beneficial to the British, but absolutely essential.
There were 2 or 3 times throughout John Quincy Adams' life where he was in England. I'm interested in the first time that he went there was not long after the War for Independence finished, if I remember correctly. I'm interested how Americans were treated in England. Did people ever treat them badly or were hostile in some way to them when they were there?
Not really personally. Officially, now John Adams was America's first minister. The government treated him very coldly and shut him out, isolated him, and ostracized him. But not personally. Now these people, you've got to remember that just 10 years or 12 years before, they had been English people, English men and women, and many of them had all of the colonies had representation, and colonists had friends. So at a social level, no, there wasn't a lot of ostracism. Adams became 15 in 1816. Even the official ostracism. I mean, there was a lot of anti-American articles, cartoons, speeches, but even on an official level, by that time, the government believed that it was, British government believed that it was in its interest to, but the American feeling continued to exist, and the British feeling at times was extremely strong up through the Civil War. At a social level, a cultural level, no, there wasn't hostility, not overt hostility.
John Quincy Adams was selected by James Monroe to be Secretary of State. Wondering about the characters and their political opinions and the history between James Monroe, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams. The Jeffersonians, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, were politically opposed to John Quincy Adams's father, John Adams, and the Federalists. But John Quincy Adams, I got from your book that he felt above political parties and partisan politics and voted more according to his own reasoning or morality. Is that how he found himself with the Republicans? He was chosen by Madison and to be a diplomat, and Monroe to be a Secretary of State.
That's right. Well, he both John and John Quincy disappointed at the emergence of political parties. They were in different interests that had to be reconciled, but they regretted it though they became kind of institutionalized, and so you had partisanship, the political combat to gain office and power for the sake of office and power. That's what they regretted. Both of them were in the sense that they believed in a strong federal government, financial and economic policy, a strong military. The Jeffersonian Republicans, were opposed to that. They were afraid that a strong federal government would become tyrannical. They were much more small government. They were opposed to creation of a national bank, for example. Writers favored local power, local control. But difference between the two has often been exaggerated. It's exaggerated during political campaigns because Jefferson and Madison and Monroe and Adams all believed in a strong U.S. and acted to defend U.S. interests strategically. Now, John Quincy came to believe that the Federalist Party by 1800 was after Jefferson's sweeping election of the rise of the Republican Party. He believed that the Federalist Party was out of touch with popular opinion, and it had posed Western expansion, which Quincy Adams favored. After John Adams defeated after Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams in the election of 1800, Quincy Adams was out of job. He was the new president, and at that point he was a minister in Prussia. So he came back to the U.S. and was Senate from Massachusetts by the Massachusetts legislature. And it was during this Jefferson's first and second administration. He, unlike Quincy Adams, unlike other New England senators, favored the Louisiana Purchase. New England felt that westward expansion would dilute the influence of the Northeast and federal councils and national council. He also supported very stringent action against the British for violation of U.S. neutral rights, including embargo, which cut off all trade between the U.S. and Great Britain, and fell very heavily on New England shippers. And so in 1808, he was dissolved by his own party. Removed him from the Senate. By that time, by that time, the Republican Party, the administration of James Madison, which included James Monroe, had become more nationalistic, more Hamiltonian, more. They favored internal improvements, the creation of federally financed roads and canals to create a national economy. They favored a stronger foreign policy, protective tariffs. So by the time Monroe decided to take Quincy Adams on as Secretary of State, the Monroe administration looked more Hamiltonian, or as Hamiltonian as the Washington and Adams administrations. So there was a kind of evolution here, but what was consistent was Quincy Adams' belief that a strong federal government that would promote economic integration, that would build a military establishment that could defend America from foreign enemies, and to promote the general welfare. That was a constant. It was the parties that changed.
As Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams was incredibly influential to the future trajectory of how the United States developed. I want to start with what's called the Adams-Onis Treaty. Could you briefly say what that was and what John Quincy Adams' role was in that?
Sure. Quincy Adams is identified with the term manifest destiny, which is this notion that was put forward by U.S. expansionists that the U.S. had been singled out by God or by destiny to occupy all of North America, the entire continent. This was nobody was coming out saying he didn't believe, but they believed that the country had to expand, grow, and become powerful enough to defend itself from its foreign enemies. I mean, when the U.S. was born as a republic, it was a republic, island in a sea of monarchies. So for ideological reasons, for strategic and economic reasons, the French, Spanish, British wanted to crush the U.S., wanted to recolonize North America. And so there was this belief among some Americans that ideologically, as well as strategically, economically, the crowned heads of Europe were determined to, if not crush American power, certainly to retard its development. Adams used all of his skill, all of his knowledge to see that did not happen. And he was committed to expelling European presence from North America, not Canada. We had tried that. We had invaded Canada, and the hopes that the Canadians would rally to our cause. That didn't happen. Mexico was still in the future, so his sights were on Texas. So in the Transcontinental Treaty, Spain was nearing the bottom of a 300-year decline. The U.S. had coveted the Floridas since Jefferson administration. Strategically important, economically important, so he used Spanish weakness. At that point, all of Spain's New World colonies were in revolt for the whole Latin American revolt, and so Spain was losing its grip, its power was heavy. So Adams managed to isolate Spain and force them to sign the Adams-Onis Treaty, the Maaskalon Treaty, in which the Floridas were sold to the United States for about $1 million. And a boundary was established marking off the Spanish Southwest from the rest of North America. The boundary that ran north of Texas and along the 42nd parallel belt all the way to the Pacific. And one of Adams's goals here that we did have our eye on the Oregon Territory, the Pacific Northwest. This eliminated Spain as a claimant to that territory, so we could focus on the British and the Russians. It was a major step in the history of continental expansion. And of course, he went on, and it's best known for the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This sweeping statement of U.S. hegemony in North America. Monroe Doctrine, which Adams author, declared that the Western Hemisphere thereafter was off limits to further European colonization. It declared that the U.S. would not permit the European meddling in American politics, whether in Latin America, Central America, North America, and really the claim that there were two spheres, the old world of the indirect statement of American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. It so happened that this suited Great Britain. They were trying to keep the continental powers from the French had dreams of a new North American empire. So it suited their interests. We weren't really able to enforce the Monroe Doctrine until after the Civil War. But this is the Monroe Doctrine would remain a central pillar of American foreign policy well through the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt, I can't remember the details of why he invoked it, but there's the Roosevelt corollary. We could possibly see the Monroe Doctrine invoked in the 21st century with Chinese influence in, say, the Panama Canal or other ports throughout the Central and South America. So it's a really...
It was important to World War II that we invoked the Monroe Doctrine and persuaded the countries of Central and South America to merge their military, their defensive systems with ours. We used it as a justification for expelling Japanese and German agents with influence. So it was a significant part of our policy.
I have, I think, three more questions, roughly. I want to ask one about the John Quincy Adams presidency and the remarkable fact that after his presidency, he served in Congress. So let's go next to his presidency. He served one term, and it was not as distinguished as his career as Secretary of State. What are some takeaways, or what can we... what is John Quincy Adams remembered for with his term as president?
Well, virtually nothing. He and his father were very poor politicians. They like to study government and governance and read about it and write about it, but they weren't very good at practicing because and this was a throwback to the old federalist England system. They believed that individuals ought not to have to campaign for office, that the public ought to voluntarily recognize their virtue and their abilities. In the 1820s, the franchise was expanding to include semi-educated, uneducated people. So the Jeffersonians and which became the Jacksonians tuned into that, played the politics of the common man. And so Adams was elected president. He was a minority president. There were 5 candidates. Andrew Jackson won the popular electoral vote, but not a majority. So it was thrown in the House with Henry Clay's support. Quincy Adams, with each state having one vote, Adams was elected. They put forward this nationalist agenda, internal improvements, a high protected tariff, national university, and Congress, which was dominated by what became the Jacksonian Democratic Party, totally rejected him. But he had some success, and he was a champion of the Cherokees and Choctaws, as when Georgia was trying to expropriate their lands and drive them out. So he turned the story to stop that, stop to block the movement. Jackson was, Quincy Adams was no match for Jackson in the political machine. So he's not, he's certainly not. And also the country had suffered a terrible depression in 18. The economy had virtually collapsed. And there were a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of foreclosure farms, and a lot of people blamed the Bank of the United States for this and federal government. So he was president in the wake of him, but his family thought that he, like other former presidents, would retire to their substantial estate in New England and to receive visitors and write to wise letters. But to his family's dismay, he decided he was drafted to run for Congress in 1831, the House of Representatives. He would serve in the House for the next 17 years. They were appalled. They thought this was a real come down. I mean, the House of Representatives in that day and age was rough and tumble. I mean, people carried guns and knives, and people lived in.
Yeah.
Many of the members were drunk most of the time. There was a sort of prostitutes special section in the galleries for prostitutes, and so his family thought that be used and abused, but they proved to be wrong. As you know, he used his seat employments to wage an unrelenting war against slavery and slave power. In essence, he was much more of an icon, much more of an influence on public affairs when he was in the House of Representatives. Something he wrote. Adams was great. The 19th century was, in U.S. political history, was the age of orators. Daniel Webster and Quincy Adams was foremost among them. He served in the Boston Professor of Rhetoric at Harvard for 2 years while he was in the Senate. He's a great student in Cicero, under the power of persuasion to effect. His speeches not only were diatribes against slavery and slave power, they were also historical. How should I say it? He was aware of the fact that the U.S., compared to the nations of Europe, was an infant nation and really was born without a history. So through speeches and Manifest Destiny and remembrances of the Pilgrims and that sort of thing, he tried to build a national, for better or worse, was able to do that sense of it.
Could you say something as well about the fact that the founding fathers are rightly hailed as brilliant men who wrote a Constitution and Declaration of Independence that created an incredible country. But John Quincy Adams, when you read about his capacity for study, for language, poetry, had the Bible memorized. He knew Cicero backwards and forwards. This man was a genius.
He was a genius, yeah. It was hard for me, a lesser person to keep up with. He's known as the father of German studies in this country. He was also the father of the Smithsonian.
Right.
Guided that project to build observatories built in this country. His mind was ceaselessly in motion. In 1831, he employed with Congress. He wrote a poem, English history. It makes him a sort of a phenomenal person. His 7,000-page diary is one of the most famous that read and recorded, quoted more than any other single document.
Is that right? Wow.
Formidable person.
Perhaps on the somewhat counter to that, we should say something about Actually, let's go back to John and Abigail. What kind of parents were they to John Quincy, and perhaps briefly, and what kind of parent was John Quincy Adams to his three sons?
Importantly, Quincy Adams was how shall I say, he was personally, emotionally very close to his father. His father took him to Europe, and they were father and son, but they were also companion. They nurtured each other. They throughout their lives they were extremely close. His mother was that day at time. His mother was self-educated, smart, ambitious. And that day and time, women had no rights, no property rights, no voting rights. So ambitious women like Abigail Adams had to live their lives through one of their children, and she did that through her eldest son. She wrote him, when he was 11, crossing the sea. She wrote him a note, which he received after he and his father arrived in Europe. And Abigail said, "I would rather, my dear son, I'd rather see sink to the bottom of the ocean than commit a dishonorable act or to in any way bring disgrace on your country." She blew up at least two major romances. She undermined them because she believed John Adams ought to be married to this country. Distraction from the role he was to play. When Adams finally became engaged to Louisa in London, he kept that secret from his mother until it was too late for him to do anything about it. So she was in many ways brutal. They were close, and after Abigail and Louisa began to draw more closely together, that relationship between John Quincy and his mother, not only intellectual but emotional. The Adams family was plagued by alcoholism. Abigail's mother died of alcoholism. Quincy's brother Charles drank himself to death. And John Quincy and Louisa had three sons. George, the eldest, committed suicide. John, the middle, only Charles Francis, the youngest, survived. When Louisa and John Quincy went to Russia, the only child they took with them was Charles Francis, who was living. They left George and John back with John and Abigail. And so during their formative years, the boys were asked they would not become a whole family until Quincy Adams until John Adams was named one of the representatives for commercial treaties of the European Congress. They weren't united, and in those two boys, I don't know, there was a sense of guilt on the part of Louisa and John Quincy. I think justifiably. So there was a lot of things. And Charles Francis not only survived physically, he was able to stand up to his father, unlike his brother. Changes after Quincy Adams was in Congress, in which his youngest son approached him and said, "You're vain, you're egotistical, sacrificed your family, you ran." And so John Quincy took that. He was hurt by it, but he took by it. So, but Charles Francis then proved able to have the strength of character and self-esteem to be able to stand up to his father's command. Went on to be installed by that pastor, U.S. Ambassador to Great Britain during the Civil.
Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but he stood up to his father about getting married, and also a time before that when he was at university and was in trouble for some rambunctious youth activity. Was that Charles as well, who they had quite a heated exchange through letters with each other?
No, the boys that got in trouble were George and John.
That was George and John. Sorry.
Yeah, they riots. One of them got kicked out of school. Charles Francis went to Harvard, but first he said these people are all kind of hacks, particularly tutors. He said the students are smaller than the tutors, and then the educational system's outdated. Said, I told his father, I said, I think I'm gonna. But he was dissuaded, and as is true in a lot of liberal arts institutions, most of the educating is done among the students themselves. So Charles went on to get his law degree and to practice, and with some difficulty, to marry into a prominent union.
A woman named Abigail. Did John Quincy survive to meet his grandchildren by Charles, like Brooks and Henry?
Yes, that's a famous story about Brooks. Brooks, he was 7. They lived. They lived in Quincy, at Peacefield, which was Brooks was. He decided why he wasn't going to school. Brooks told me, "Oh, Joe." John Quincy was upstairs, got Brooks by the hand. Cool. Not a word passed between them, but that's thing. And there were two. There were grandchildren from not George, but John had grandchildren. Uh, and so there were a number of grandchildren, but Charles Francis and Housen. They were very close. Of course, the grandparents were. He was much easier.
I want to ask you one last question about the subtitle of the book. You called the book John Quincy Adams, A Man for the Whole People. Why did you decide on that subtitle, A Man for the Whole People?
Well, the subtitle originally I wanted to use was a quote from Quincy Adams. And it was, I would fain, F-E-I-G-M, I would fain be a man for the whole people. But my publisher wouldn't let me do that. They wanted me to use it, a man for the whole people. I think that you could make the argument that no public figure, the public or the Jackson period did more for marginalized people. Now he believed in a restricted franchise, but not based on race or gender, but on education. But what he did, he had not only his opposition to slavery, but he had close ties to the free black community, particularly those free blacks who were engaged in the abolitionist setting and honored by free black communities in this country. And he fought tooth and nail against Indian removal. Now, he was in assimilations. He didn't believe the tribes could assimilate, but he fought tooth and nail against, because they were still expelled. You could argue that and he was willing to sacrifice his native region, England's economic interests, to strengthen the nation. That in supporting westward expansion, which would dilute the power of the New England states as Northern doing. He certainly, again, I would rather have quoted him than made the claim himself. But that's the way it is in publishing.
This book, you said it took 8 years of research and writing, and the project in total was about 10 years spent on it.
Probably, just
I found it a delight reading this book, and I thought it was without blemish. I mean, it was entertaining from start to finish. The amount of research you must have had to have done to write this book is an amazing achievement.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's been a great pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. Very much enjoyed it.